The way that we're going to do a virtual farm tour is through this 40 virtual farms that you can see on the screen at the moment. And then for the pig farm, I'll also show you some stuff from some farm tours that Australia Pork put together. So this 40 virtual farms, it's a tool that we use in the vet school, but we obviously use it for this as well when we can't see you in person. It's a collaborative effort with a bunch of universities in Australia, so 4 universities in Australia that have got vet schools in them, and then Massey here. And so they put together snapshots from different types of farms. It's mostly sheep, cattle and dairy, but there is an example of a piggery there from the University of Queensland. So that's the one that we'll pop in and take a bit of a look around. So we're going to use this. The link is in this presentation, but it's also on the stream site for you. So whilst this morning you're going to come around this particular software with me, you can, if you want to, go in and look at the farms we're going to look at, or any of these other farms that are listed if you're curious about what other farms look like, and things like that. Okay, there's an instruction video about how to use it, but it's fairly self-explanatory. And this little learning outcomes button is for the software itself. It does have some nice links to some information. It's got a lot of information about Australian agriculture, to be fair, but that's not our learning outcomes for this particular lab. Our learning outcomes are these ones here. So if you're from a farm, this isn't going to be wholly unfamiliar to you. You're going to be familiar with a lot of the terms and the things that we're going to look at today. But for people that have not been to farms or are not from a farming background, the idea behind today is just basically to set eyes on what it kind of looks like inside a couple different farming systems, and to learn some of the terminology that we use to refer to things on farm, to understand some of the different infrastructure, like the buildings and the sheds and yards and things that are required on different types of farms. And for New Zealand, I suppose there's some landscape features as well that are fairly characteristic of dairy farms, and there's landscape features that are fairly characteristic of sheep farms. The software, so unlike a visit to a farm where we can only take you out at a single time point, the software has got images from farms at 4 different time points across the year. So we're also able to see a little bit of the seasonal variation. So I can talk to you about how New Zealand manages its pastoral based ruminant systems, and how that all ties into the calendar of management activities on some of those properties. And then for each of the properties that we visit, we'll talk about what might be some of their primary environmental or biosecurity issues. Okay. So yeah, you're going to come around with me. There's a link there, plus it's on stream, and then this link is also on stream as well. The virtual farm tour that Australia Pork put together, which is very nice. It's got some nice images in there if you want to familiarise yourself with intensive industries versus our extensive pastoral industries. So just before I start talking about the farms too much, I just want to put in the disclaimer that what I'm kind of taking you through is a generalized farming system. Okay, farming systems are as unique as the people that run them. So what I'm saying here may not hold true on absolutely every single property. I'm talking about some broad generalizations about sheep farms in New Zealand and broad generalizations about dairy farms in New Zealand. We just happen to be using these 2 farms, this sheep farm and the dairy farm, that are in this software, so that we can do that. Okay, so Ferndale is the sheep and beef farm that we'll take a little bit of a look around in a minute. That little red dot on the map is where it's located, so it's located up near Taihabe. The way that they've done it is they've put 14, they call them nodes, but they're basically cameras. They're 360-degree cameras on 14 places around the property at 4 times of the year. So we can see the same part of the farm and how season affects it. The piggery is part of the University of Queensland, so that's out in Gatton. And there's various nodes through some of the different buildings they have. It is an indoor piggery. It's not an outdoor piggery, but because it's an indoor facility, it's a single time point. Season, well, I mean, it affects how you manage it. It might affect whether or not you put fans or sprinklers on in the sheds and things like that, but it doesn't, you know, the visual contrast of pasture growing and not pasture growing isn't there, so they don't do multiple time points in the piggery. Before we go into the first farm, the sheep farm, I just want to talk to you about this, because this underpins the way that New Zealand farms its grazing livestock, its ruminant livestock. So New Zealand has a pastoral-based feeding system, which means they want to utilise as much of the grass that grows to feed their animals as possible, okay? That being said, supplementation is pretty common in the dairy industry. It's not very common in the sheep industry unless it's necessary. Most of the time, sheep farmers are able to utilise the pasture that's grown quite successfully. The dairy farms, the cows, the energy requirements of the cows when they're lactating are so high that you need to supplement them with some additional food because the grass is, well, it's got a lot of water in it, so it's bulky. But yeah, we need to supply them with extra energy to make all the milk. So this green line is the pasture growth curve, the typical pasture growth curve for New Zealand. It varies depending on where you are in New Zealand, because obviously climate varies across New Zealand a bit, and it'll vary depending on whether or not you're on flatland or up mountains and things like that. But typically, in spring, we've got a lot of pasture growing, okay? In summer, pasture growth slows down because it dries off. And also pasture gets reproductive, okay? Pasture is a living organism, it's a living plant, so it goes through life cycles itself. So it's in a vegetative or growing state in spring, and then it slows down its growth and becomes reproductive and creates seed heads during summer. There's often a little bit of growth in some regions of New Zealand through autumn because we get a little bit of rain. But then in winter time, pasture growth tapers off quite dramatically, not because it's dry so much, but because it's cold. When it's cold, the pasture just doesn't grow, okay? It's still nice and green, but it doesn't grow like it does in spring. So how that fits with animal demand, the animal demand's this yellow line. So if we put animal demand, so that's their nutrient requirements in there, what you can see is that in springtime, we're growing more grass than the animal needs. In summertime, where the animals' requirements are higher than the amount of pasture we make, and then same sort of for the winter period as well. So what that creates is periods where we've got more pasture than we need and some periods where we don't have enough pasture. So for some farming systems, it's about taking the pasture from here and either conserving it or removing it and planting crops and things like that so that we can fill this feed gap that's here. So that's the basis of how a pastoral system runs. I'll be talking about this in the lectures next week, but because you're doing the lab before the lectures, I just wanted to make sure that you guys were on the same page about that. And that's why when we look at the pasture at the farms at different times of the year and the types of activities that might be on farms at different times of year, it's all in relation to how we're working with the environmental variation in pasture growth. Okay. If at any point you've got questions, you can put them in that chat there. Ella's going to be keeping a little bit of an eye on that if I'm not keeping an eye on it, and she'll yell at me. Or you can turn your microphones off and you can also yell out questions. So the 40 farms allows us to have a look at the same part of the farm at different periods of the year. Okay, so we can see the seasonal variation in pasture growth or pasture quality for that matter. The other thing it allows us to do is actually have a look at different types of farming systems in different locations that have got different climatic extremes. Okay, so we obviously are going to be focusing on our New Zealand farms, but there are farms from Australia there, and we might pop into a few of them just so you can see the stark variation in systems. Okay, and that's what I mean about sort of broad generalizations. Depending on where you are and the sorts of challenges that you're faced with is going to determine how you run your property and the sorts of things that you have to do. Okay, so let's go into the farms. So this page comes up when you click the link, and then you just click into the farm that you want to visit. We're going to go and visit Ferndale first. So Ferndale is a North Island sheep and beef property. It's fairly characteristic of most hill country sheep and beef farms. So the first thing that you notice in the first place that we enter on the farm, obviously, is up at the top of one of the ridge lines across one of the hills. And when we go and visit the dairy, you'll see the contrast in the landscape. Okay, so typically in New Zealand, sheep and beef farms are situated in the hill country or the hillier and more steep country, whereas dairy farms are on the flat land. There's a couple of reasons for that. It's not to say that there's no sheep farm. They're starting to buzz stuff outside. Is that annoying?
What does everyone else think? I didn't find it too loud, but
it's all good. Thank you. I'm glad somebody else. All right. Maybe it's just loud to me. I'm just really uber conscious of it because I'm getting sick of it. Okay, so it's not to say that there's no sheep farms on the flats. There are some sheep farms on the flats, but they tend to be specialised properties. They're often finishing farms or sort of stud breeding farms or things like that. But in the main, sheep farms are in the hill country, whereas dairy farms are on the flat land. This particular farm, Ferndale, it's a 2,000 hectare farm, but only about 1,700 hectare of that is effective. Okay, so that just means that there's a few hundred hectare that are not productive. They're either probably too hard to get to, and they've been left to go. They've been retired and they've been left to go back to bush, or it'll be part of the homestead and things like that. So it's got a 1,700 hectare effective area. It runs both sheep and cattle at an 80-20 ratio. Okay, so 80% of its stock units would be sheep, 20% would be cattle. It's got about 15,000 stock units. Okay, so there's a lot of sheep. New Zealand has a lot of sheep, but sheep farms typically have got a lot of animals, whereas dairy farms is the average herd size I think is about 420 or something like that. But there's variation in that as well. But sheep farms have usually got quite a lot of animals on them. As you can see, there's an awful lot of hill country. I'll bring this up. So this is a little, if you go down to the little globe there, it shows you where those little cameras are set up around the property. Okay, those little green dots, which are pretty hard to see, but they're there nonetheless. What you obviously can see from this aerial view is that the farm it's almost all hill country. In fact, when you look at the classifications for that particular farm, about 85 to 90% of it is classified as steep to very steep. So what that means is that pasture quality on steep, very steep hillsides tends to be lower than it is on flat land. which is one of the reasons why dairy's down the bottom and sheep are up in the hills. But it also means, from a management point of view, vehicle access to some of the parts of the farm is pretty limited. Okay, so often there's going to be horses and dogs that are involved. Okay, so often there's interaction with other stock in these sorts of properties because it's hard to get to, and it's dangerous to get to on quad bikes and things like that, up into the very steep country. If we talk about some of the issues that might be of priority for a sheep farm, this is the note I like to use for that. Okay, so like I said, you can click around and you can see the whole of Ferndale there. We might look at this side for kicks today. So one of the biggest issues that hill country farms have to deal with is the hillsides themselves. Okay, so if you have a look at this hillside, you can see a lot of these little sort of ridge lines going across the hill. And if you look up here as well, the other side might show it better, but you can see sections of the hillside, and there's one on the other side as well. If you look up here, see this whole section of the hillside has actually at some point slumped away. Okay, so you get a lot of soil slippage when you're dealing with hills, especially hills that have been cleared for pastoral activities. That's the problem when you take out deep-rooted plants off a hillside. The hillside starts to fall down, especially with the soil types that we have here. And you can see as well the damage that rainfall does and the way that it contributes to the slippage. So rainfall starts to create these little kind of gullies, these little rivets through the hillside. And yeah, the soil type will get full of water and it'll get really heavy and it'll slump down. You know, occasionally coming into Massey, bits of the hillside that's around the corner will slump down, the gorge close because of land slippage and things like that. So hillsides and slippage is a big deal. And when you're trying to farm on hills, slope stabilization, so that you can continue to farm those areas is a bit of a priority. And it's becoming a bigger priority for farmers as well because of issues like carbon budgets and things like that. You can plant trees on your property and it's got kind of a double pronged effect. You can plant some deeper rooted shrubs or trees on your hillsides, which will stabilize the slopes for you, which is fabulous, which means you don't have to worry as much about soil slippage, but it also means that you can utilize those the carbon from those trees as carbon credits, but that's a whole nother complicated issue that farmers have to deal with at the moment. So soil slippage on those cleared areas is one of the biggest environmental issues that sheep farms are dealing with, and they can sometimes remediate that by planting trees. The trees can be, you could plant pine trees if you wanted to, so you're putting some agroforestry in there that you might have to harvest later. You can plant trees that provide fodder for your sheep and or cattle. You can plant willows and poplars, okay, so sheep and cattle will eat those. You've got to manage them a wee bit, or what's becoming increasingly popular is to plant mixtures of native shrubs. There's incentive to do that as well. You can get some grants and things to do that, and then, you know, obviously it helps with improving biodiversity and things like that, and it provides a native habitat for wildlife and things on your property. And there are a number of native shrubs that actually your livestock will eat also, so they've got the potential to provide a bit of a food source as well. I'll show you the season. So I talked about the fact that you can view the farm at different times of the year. So this one here would be our spring example. And again, I want you to I suppose try to keep these images in mind when we go to the dairy and look at the contrast between what springtime looks like on a dairy versus what springtime looks like on a sheep farm. So that's spring. This here is summer. So this is when the grass is starting to brown off and go reproductive and create those seed heads. Which means that in addition to grass growth slowing down in summer, the growth of stalks and seed head increases the fiber content of the grass, which reduces its nutrient value for ruminants. So in addition to pasture growth decreasing, also the nutritional quality of the grass in summer lowers. Depends on where you are and whether or not you've got space to plant things, but there are various alternative crops that you can plant and have animals grow. Some popular ones for sheep are things like herb mixed clover pastures that might have red and white clover in it, and chicory and plantain, things like that. They grow really well in summer, and a nice green lush feed that you can have when the rest of your grass, when the ryegrass looks like this. You can have some nice green stuff to feed particular classes of stock on your property that you might need growing fast. This here is April, so this would be autumn. Some of the cattle are out there. You know, it's starting to green up, but you've still got some of those brown areas. And then through to winter, where the grass growth has slowed dramatically because it's really cold. And so you can see, you know, obviously patches of ground starting to peep up, and the grass just gets lower and lower and lower and lower and lower. And that obviously impacts how much grass a ruminant animal is able to harvest, because they have to be able to grab it and bite it. Okay, so we will pop into the yards, I think, now, which means I have to go back to September. So on a sheep farm, there's typically going to be your main set of yards, but often you'll have some smaller sets of yards around the property because you know, if you need to do something with your animals and they're way off up in the hillside, you don't want to have to bring them all the way down to the main set of yards, which typically are situated, you know, at sort of easy truck access to the property. So sometimes there'll be some smaller yards situated around, but there'll be one main set of big yards, and it's a sheep farm. So what else are they going to need? They're going to need a shearing shed. So there's a shearing shed there at the back. But notably, this one is a sheep and beef farm, so it's got beef cattle on it as well. So you can't just have yards for sheep, okay? Because sheep yards obviously are the size for a sheep, but a beef cow will just jump over that. So they do need to have some larger holding pens and larger yarding so that they can deal with the beef cattle whenever they need to deal with them, which isn't frequently, but you still need to be able to hold them in pens. So these yards out here are high enough for the beef cattle, so they'd be dealt with out here. You know, they can use them for the sheep obviously as well, because they're still perfectly adequate for sheep, but they are tall enough out here for the beef cows. You can see some lovely protective equipment there, which stops people and or animals banging themselves on it. So they've got crates. There's probably a set of load bars underneath there, so that they can weigh animals. And then obviously they've got a loading ramp, so you know exactly how much animal is getting on a truck. And if we go then over here, this takes us into the sheep yards. So these are yards that the beef cattle wouldn't go into. Pity there wasn't a person standing there for comparison, but obviously these are too short for beef cattle. So this part of the yards is just for the sheep. This particular sheep farm has got a nice covered area for the sheep, which is lovely. When you're talking about, you know, sort of tens of thousands of sheep, if you're going to be bringing sheep in for any of the sort of activities that might occur on farm, be that weaning of lambs from their mother, or bringing them in for shearing, or bringing them in for any number of things they might have to come in for. If you've got that many sheep to get through, they're going to be held in yards for a reasonably long period of time. So having covered yards is always nice. Not all sheep farms have covered yards. It's probably a bit more comfortable to work and have the sheep standing under covered yards. Means if it's raining, they're not going to get sort of rained on, and sheep obviously have got fleeces, so they're just going to get soggy if they get rained on. So we can do a full, so you can see some of the saddles and stuff here. So again, like I said, they're going to need sheep. They're going to need horses in some areas in the property to actually round up animals. And you can do a full 360 around this sheep yards if you want. If I pop to a different time of the year, there's actually sheep standing in here. Da, da, da. Okay, so you can see a bunch of the sheep here that have been brought in for some reason in January. Does anyone who's from a sheep and beef farm want to have a guess at what might be happening in January? What happens in January on your property? Have we lost everybody? Sending lambs away, correct. Go Tegan, thank you. Probably. To be fair, I don't 100% know why the sheep are in this particular image. It was a while ago, but that's my assumption. So if you think about the sorts of calendar of activities that happen on a sheep farm, now we're going to start drilling. That was probably a bit more annoying, isn't it? Excuse me. Does that work?
Yeah.
All right. Now I've got my Mickey Mouses on. We will carry on for weeks. This has been happening. I should just work from home today. All right. Yeah. So if we think about the calendar of activities for a sheep farm, again, this is a bit of a simplified version of what happens. But if we think about the fact that the sheep is a seasonal animal, so it's reproductively seasonal. Its estrous cycle is affected by season, which means it's switched on at a certain time of the year and it's switched off at the rest of the times of the year. Okay, so sheep are reproductively active. You can get them pregnant at the beginning of the year. Okay, sort of they'll be mated probably February through to April, maybe May. Depends on, again, where you are and how you want to time the lambing. So you can only get them pregnant in that reproductively active part of the year. If they're not pregnant, if you fail to get them pregnant, you have to wait a whole nother year to get her potentially serviced by the ram again. So there's a whole bunch of things that you can do to try to maximize conception rates during that reproductive period. But you get them pregnant at the beginning of the year. A sheep's pregnancy is probably about 5 months or thereabouts. 145, 150 days is a sheep pregnancy. So they're pregnant then, which means that beautifully they will lamb in springtime. What's happening in springtime? What does the grass look like in spring? Green and delicious, correct. It does look green and delicious because lactation, most energetically demanding thing a female will ever do. So it takes a lot of additional food and a lot of additional energy to produce milk, even if it's just for little lambs. So you want a lot of feed available to her. So evolution has done that for us. Okay, so it's created a seasonal animal because of where sheep evolved. They get pregnant at particular times of the year so that they're
birth, the lamb's birth coincides with the period of the year that has the most feed available. Okay, it happens with a couple of other species as well. But so that works really nicely. The lambs then will stay on their mother for about 3 months, okay, or thereabouts, which means the technicians here like to do it just before Christmas because they want to go away in January, but a lot of farms will wean in January. So around that kind of Christmas, January period is when the lambs typically will be taken off their mothers. By then the lambs are big enough and they're eating predominantly grass anyway. So the lambs will be removed and the ewes will be sent off into some dry ewe paddocks so that they can prepare for the next breeding cycle, which is only like a month or two away for them. The lambs then, okay, you need to put the lambs on something that's going to be growing well. So if you're growing some of those green summer crops, that's great. You can put your lambs on them and they'll grow really beautifully and fast, so that you can get them to slaughter weights, or if they're replacement ewes, you can grow them so that they'll attain puberty within the right window. If you are not growing crops, it means you're going to make decisions on your farm and you're probably going to give your lambs your better quality pasture, and your ewes might go up into the slightly poorer quality up into the hills, because in summer there's not a lot of grass around it and the quality of it's fairly poor, but you've got a category of livestock on your property that you want to be growing well. You want the lambs growing well. It's not that the ewes, you want them growing badly, but they'll be able to process the slightly more fibrous feed a bit better than a lamb will. Okay, so then you start again, basically. Okay, so then the ewes would go into mating again in that sort of February, April, May period, and then again they lamb. So it just goes round and round and round and round and round. The tricky thing on a sheep property is managing the different classes of livestock, and the fact that different classes of livestock you want growing at different rates, but then also the period of time that the ewe is pregnant is the winter period. Okay, and if you remember that pasture growth curve I showed you, pasture doesn't really grow over winter. Okay, so managing the nutrition of your pregnant ewes over winter is a delicate thing, because obviously her nutrient demands are increasing, and you can affect the way that the placenta grows and the way that the fetus grows depending on how you feed the mother. And obviously, depending on how the fetus grows is going to determine whether or not, your lambs are sort of thriving and stuff when they're born. So sheep farmers are able to manage their pastures in such a way that they can feed their ewes adequately over winter, and then have lots of lovely pasture growing come spring when the lambs are born. So pasture management and the way that farmers manage to do that is a phenomenal thing, and I think they're awesome for doing it. Does everyone sort of understand that calendar of events? And it all ties into each other. The reason you do things, there's particular reasons for why you do things on properties. No one's asking any questions, so that's good. We'll pop over here, which I think, oh no, I did that before, didn't I? That doesn't take you into the shed, despite the arrow looking like it should. All right, so if you've been on a sheep, could I repeat what happens throughout the year? I can repeat what happens throughout the year. So at the beginning of the year, the ewes have their previous lamb taken away, and then they're mated again. You mate ewes, the breeding period's probably from February through to April, May. She's pregnant then across winter for about 145, 150 days. She has her lamb in about August, September. In spring, so that there's lots of lovely green pasture around. The lamb stays with her probably until January, when that lamb is taken away, and then provided she's still capable, she just carries on as a breeding ewe. Lambs then are held on the property and grown to whatever market weight the farmer is targeting. So that's sort of the real basic stuff. What I didn't mention, though, was shearing, I suppose. typically there's sort of 2 periods of the year where shearing might occur. The people that work on sheep and beef, people that come off from sheep and beef properties, they might be able to contribute what times of year that they do the shearing, but typically there's a peak of shearing from sort of November through to March. That's probably when most shearers would be working. And then there's also a smaller period of shearing from July to September. Yeah, so the November-March shearing, that would usually be whole fleece. The July to September one, that's through winter, so it may or may not be the whole fleece. It might just be cleaning up the belly and the breech area of the ewe. Depends on where you are and what your climate permits. You have to time shearing right with the weather, because otherwise you run into trouble. This year, actually, we ran into trouble at the beginning of the year because a whole bunch of places shore a bunch of the lambs and things like that, and then there was nasty weather the next week, and so we lost a bunch because of that. So you're dealing with weather extremes and things like that, so you've got to be a little bit careful about your shearing. If you shear ewes when they're pregnant, in that July-September period, what you can sometimes achieve is by making them feel a little bit colder because you've removed some of their insulation, they will eat a bit more. If they eat a bit more, that's going to help with their fetal growth. Okay, so you can sometimes stimulate appetite by giving the ewe a little bit of a cold shock, sort of in mid-pregnancy. Some people do, some people don't. There's no chance of miscarriage. No, generally not. It doesn't usually cause miscarriage. As I said, often it's not a full fleece. So, I mean, you're not trying to cold shock the crap out of them. You're trying to just make them a little bit colder so that they eat a little bit more. And shearers are pretty good, and by it's mid-pregnancy as well. A lot of the losses are going to be early sort of embryo losses and things like that. It'll be problems with implantation is when you probably see most of the losses and things. All right, so this is the shearing shed that's on Ferndale. We can spin around and we can see the various parts of it. So if you've never been inside a shearing shed, this is what a shearing shed sort of looks like. As I said, different places can look like different, have different sheds. If you want to see what different sheds look like, or Australian sheds anyway, you can go and have a look on those other farms. So sheep will come up the back. If we go back out here, and I make everybody sick by swinging that around. There's a ramp from the yards that goes up into the shearing shed. And that, why does it keep bringing me back there? That'll bring the sheep up here into the back part, okay, into where all these little holding pens and stuff are. It's a slatted floor, so any poop and wheeze obviously will fall through and collect down the bottom. Sometimes you can clean that out. Sometimes sheds don't bother. So sheep will come up through the back here, and they're held in all of these little holding pens. If you are shearing them, these are the little engines that will drive the shearing pieces. The shearer will attach the little shearing combs to the end of that, and they'll drag a sheep out of these pens onto the boards, and they will shear them, and they'll put the fleece aside, obviously, like that one's stuck over there. Well, that's probably just daggy bits. And then they'll shove the sheep, if I get rid of these nodes, they'll shove the sheep down one of these little chutes, and they're usually chutes that go back down under the building into a pen outside. And in that way, they get to separate shorn sheep from the ones that are still requiring shearing. You'll often do, if the farm, for whatever reason, does artificial insemination or any kind of weird kind of embryo transfer and stuff, that usually happens inside. The only difference, I suppose, about this one compared to the sheds, I guess, that I'm probably a bit more familiar with, is that these boards are not raised. Usually the shearing platform in a shearing shed would be raised up so that the people that are working on the floor that have to grab the fleeces and stuff don't have to bend down to pick them up. They just pull them off the shearing stage and chuck them onto the classing table. But what works. The way that wool is handled, and these sheep obviously wouldn't be for fine wool, that's merinos, which typically are in the South Island of New Zealand. Merinos don't like the North Island at all. If you bring merinos up here, they start to fall apart physically. They don't like the moisture. They start to rot. They get foot rot and they get fleece rot. So the wool goes into these fadges, okay, these big bags, and then it gets compressed in one of these and squashed into that kind of classic wool bale that you might be familiar with. And then that's what can get picked up. Okay. The only thing else I needed to show you was these little flat paddocks. Okay, so whilst a large proportion of Ferndale is steep to very steep, they do have some flat paddocks, and typically flat paddocks are going to be reserved for activities like lambing. Okay, so it's easier to look after ewes that are lambing when they're in a flat paddock. Okay, there's no chance, well, there's less chance of them getting cast, which means they roll over and they end up on their back and they get stuck like a little turtle because they're very pregnant and they can't get back up. There's no chance of lambs, rolling down gullies and things like that and dying at the bottom. So flat paddocks are easier for the stockman to check, do the lambing beats, but it's also a nicer place for ewes to lamb. This one here also has got some nice trees and things in it, which ewes quite like to camp around when they're having their babies. So again, I just want to draw your attention to the grass, I suppose, so that when we change from here and go and look at the dairy, you can see that the sort of grass cover, it's quite distinctly different between a sheep farm and a dairy. On a sheep farm, I always think they look more like lawns. Okay, they're much more uniform. They're usually more uniform, whereas on the dairy properties, the grass is a lot longer, and obviously you get some of those big clumps of pasture growing up because of the urine being deposited and the nitrogen in that causing growth in little patches around the paddock, whereas it's sheep don't produce quite the volume of urine that cows do, at least not in one go. So it's a bit more evenly distributed. I think that's everything I needed to talk about with Ferndale. So what Ella's going to do, I think maybe only 2 minutes or something, Ella. They don't really need to be in those breakout rooms for long. We're going to pop you into some breakout rooms just for a couple of minutes so you can, what am I trying to say? So that you can make sure that you've got information to kind of answer these types of questions, the ones that are in that handout, the notes that I wanted you to take, so you can confer with your classmates and make sure that you've got everything, and then you can come back, and if you think you were missing anything, you can ask me to clarify or to tell you again. Okay?
Cool.
Nice. All right. That seems to be everybody back then. So does anyone need me to clarify anything or restate anything? The quiz that you guys are going to do in relation to this particular lab are only about the 3 farms that I mentioned there, the Ferndale, Glenview, and the University of Queensland piggery. So I'm going to just whip into one of the Western Australian farms just to show you the contrast in environments that, when you start to move and start to look at some sort of international agriculture, just to try to put some perspective on the New Zealand systems, I suppose, which I think is always helpful. But if I go into any of the other farms, they're not part of the quiz. The quiz is only about Ferndale, Glenview, and the University of Queensland piggery. Which one? Hillcroft. Let's go to Hillcroft. Okay, so this is a Western Australian farm. So immediately you can sort of see that it's sort of different anyway, but we'll just nip into it real quick and then we'll get to the dairy. Obviously in Australia, not quite as many hills to deal with. So it's typically pretty flat. This is our spring. You can see a crop growing over there. So a lot of the time, the sheep farms in Australia have got a lot of crops growing on them as well. But if I just change December, so I just want you to sort of have a look at the stark difference in the seasons that different farming systems in different countries are dealing with. Obviously, if we go to a different country, it's going to be completely different again. If we went to somewhere tropical, it's going to be different again. So to put it into perspective, different farming systems require different strategies depending on their environment. Okay, you can't just, you can't just decide to apply New Zealand farming strategies in an Australian environment. Okay, it doesn't work like that. You farm according to the environment that you're in. Okay, you can visit the other farms whenever you like. Okay, so now we just have to do the last one, Ella. We just have to do the piggery. I asked people, didn't I? No one had been onto a piggery? No one's admitting to being on a piggery. The piggery, as I said, that I'm going to show you is an Australian piggery. It's an indoor piggery. New Zealand doesn't have heaps of piggeries. It's only got about 100 commercial piggeries. About 45% of them are outdoor facilities, about 55% are indoor facilities. And we'll talk more about them when we talk about livestock systems. But in terms of the indoor systems, they're probably fairly uniform between places because it's all indoors. So this is really just to provide you, again, with a bit of context and some comparison between those extensive systems that we saw, the sheep and dairy, compared to an intensive system, okay, where the animals are housed a lot closer together, and typically it's run in much more of a batch fashion, with small groups of animals rotating through various parts of the farm. Oh, I just closed and that was stupid. All right, so the first place they bring us is to the office. So every farm usually has got a single point of entry and exit, which helps to control visitors and things like that, and gives some instructions in terms of biosecurity, just in case people need to wash tires on vehicles or change boots, wash boots, etc. For a piggery, biosecurity is a big deal. Okay, so biosecurity is something they take really seriously because the animals are housed in sort of more close quarters. Disease spread through piggeries is pretty rapid, same as it would be for a poultry facility. And then also there's a number of diseases which can be transferred from humans to pigs and pigs to humans, more so than sort of cattle and sheep to humans. So for piggeries, usually they are completely enclosed compounds with a single port of entry, and you must sign in and register. And then there's a whole bunch of biosecurity things that you have to adhere to. And this is just this is particular to this one, but often places will have similar stuff. So you don't wear your own clothes. When you go into a piggery, you'll be provided with clothes to wear and boots to wear. The clothes and the boots, the overalls and the boots that you wear, stay inside the piggery. They're cleaned inside the piggery and they live inside the piggery. They don't come home with you. You don't, bring them back in the next day. You wear your own clothes in, you change out of them into the overalls, and put your boots on, and off you go. There are some piggeries I've been to where they will make you take showers before you actually enter the facility, and sometimes they'll make you take showers on the way out as well. Depends on their level of biosecurity. In addition to the piggery providing you with the overalls and the boots, there's some quarantine rules that you have to abide by. This was back in 2013-14 when swine flu was causing some problems, but flus and things like that can transfer between humans and pigs. So if you've got any flu-like symptoms, you're not allowed into the facility. Or if you have recently been overseas, you're also not allowed into the facility for at least 10 days, so that you don't transfer or potentially transfer flu or any other sort of exotic disease to the pigs. If you have been in contact with other pigs, either at a piggery or a processing plant, you have to wait 72 hours before you enter a new pig facility. So there's quarantine periods for if you're not well or have been somewhere you may have picked up some kind of exotic disease. There's also quarantine periods for if you've been in contact with pigs at other facilities. So biosecurity is a big deal on piggeries. One of the ways that piggeries will often control some of their biosecurity is that they won't bring live animals into the facility. Okay, so pigs, live pigs are not brought in. The way that they'll introduce new genetics to the herd is through their artificial insemination programs. So most pig breeding is done by artificial insemination. And we'll see some of the mating pens and stuff inside, but if they want to introduce new genetics, that's how they'll do it. They won't buy in different genetic pigs and bring the live pigs in. This particular piggery has got 380 breeding sows. The 380 breeding sows will farrow, which means give birth to about 10 piglets, or they'll wean rather about 10 piglets per litter, and they'll have about 2 litters per year. Okay, so total, if you do the math, that's about 7,500 piglets produced. They will rear about 2,000 on site, but the others will be sent to their finishing facility. The way that piggeries and poultry facilities work, for that matter, is that they function more in a batch situation. So the gestation lengths are shorter, obviously, and then they've got defined little periods of growth or breeding for the adult animals. So a pig is pregnant for 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days, or thereabouts. And the piglets are kept with the mother probably for about 28 days, or thereabouts, and then they go through different growing facilities. But in between each of those kind of little time points, the animals will be removed from that part of the facility and moved into the next part. That part will get completely cleaned and sanitized, and then the next batch of pigs will move in. Okay, so again, that's how they then control biosecurity between their batches of pigs as well. There'll be a lot of cleaning and sanitation that's happening before pigs enter a point. They'll stay there for a set amount of time, and then they'll move to the next bit. It'll get cleaned and sanitized, and the next batch will move in. So not all 380 sows are farrowing at once. They're broken up into social groups, which they try to keep as fairly stable, because pigs will fight if you mix up unfamiliar pigs, and they will shift them around in a bit of a batch situation. But I'm talking too much, and we may as well go inside. This is that stupid room. Let me just bring up this. All right. So it's always hard to know where to begin, because this is part of a big circle. It's part of a big cycle. So you're just going to have to jump on the circle, on the wheel at some point. So these are farrowing crates. Have people heard of farrowing crates before? Oh, yeah. Yes, yes. There's some negative connotations associated with farrowing crates. I think I need to look up the dates. Australia at some point, I think, has actually agreed to phase them out. New Zealand's negotiating that potentially at the moment. There's no current ban or phase out plan. I think that's being discussed at the moment within MPI and the National Advisory Committees for Welfare and Ethics and things like that. Big in the news at the moment. It is big in the news at the moment because, yes, it's being discussed currently. There's good things and bad things about farrowing crates. Okay, so if you actually look at some of the research, farrowing crates actually are the best compromise for welfare between the sow and the piglets. But it does restrict the natural behaviour of the sow, and people don't like the idea of holding pigs in such confined crates, which is fair. The reason that farrowing crates are used is because it protects the piglets. Okay, it protects the piglets and it protects the staff. It also makes it a little bit easier to keep an eye on the sow and check her and access her for particular treatments and things as well. Sows, when they farrow, obviously a lot of animals when they give birth get quite protective. And if you're holding the sow in a crate, it means the staff can interact with her in a more safe manner. And then also, if you compare the size difference between a piglet that's born and its mother, it's quite significant. Okay, compared to the size differential between a lamb and a ewe or a calf and a cow, the size differential between a piglet and a sow is pretty enormous. So one of the main causes of death for piglets is going to be in the first couple of days of life, and they're going to get sat on by the sow. Sometimes as well, you get a sow which will savage her piglets, which will mean that she will bite them up and chew them and kill them. But that's the main cause of the death for piglets. So the crate provides some safe space for the piglets. The other thing it does is that because of the way that the bars are shaped, it means that when the sow is going to lie down, and she's got freedom of movement to lie down on either side, she just doesn't have the freedom of movement to turn completely around. She's got freedom of movement to walk backwards, walk forwards a bit. But when she's going to sit down, to lie down, the shape of the crate typically make her do that a little bit slower than she might do otherwise. If she's outside and she's got no restrictions, she tends to block. And the piglets sometimes they're in the way. And she's big and they get squashed. If they're in a farrowing crate, it takes her a little bit longer to sit down, so the piglets have a little bit more time to get out the way. So it does provide protection to the piglets, and it improves piglet survival. But they're not. The thoughts, the public perception of farrowing crates is affecting our social license to farm pigs and things like that. So again, I talked about social license in that welfare lecture, and we need to farm according to acceptable practices as well, because otherwise it becomes a nightmare. So at the moment there's a lot of discussion about farrowing crates and whether or not we should be using them. Here's some more farrowing crates. The other thing, I suppose, that it creates for the piglets, but you can do this in an outdoor situation. The sow is a big animal. She produces a lot of heat. She doesn't like to be too hot, whereas the piglets are small and they like to be nice and toasty. So you're able, typically in a nesting area, be it indoors or outdoors, there's often a place where piglets can go where they can try to be a little bit more insulated. In a farrowing house, it's a bit easier. You can put a heat lamp and things like that, and create a little hot box for them to go into if they're getting cold. And then that means that heat is not affecting the sow negatively. So each of the farrowing crates will have a little area that the piglets can get to. It also creates a space, as piglets get closer to weaning, we start to feed them what's called a creep feed, which is a very tasty little feed. It smells like chocolate Ribble biscuits. But it's like a little tiny little pellet, tiny crumble that you can give to piglets to get their gastrointestinal systems used to solid food before they are then popped out into the weaner shed, where they will be offered only solid food. But obviously you don't want the sow eating that, and she would under normal circumstances. So you need a place to put that where only the piglets can get to it and she can't. She gets her own food. The farrowing crates allow us to give her kind of, well, you can do it outdoor as well, individual amounts of food, but they're a bit easier to I suppose, observe when they're in this exposed farrowing crate. Most of the outdoor farrowing huts are enclosed. You've got to breed a slightly different pig if you're farming with outdoor pigs. Ones that are a little bit more suitable to outdoor farming systems. Okay, so this is the farrowing house. I'll just keep clicking on things. There'll always be some kind of central store area inside a piggery where they keep the chemicals and the drugs and the vaccines and all those sorts of things, because typically, and all the artificial insemination equipment, because the piggery staff are usually the people that are administering that and doing the artificial insemination. It's the staff at the piggery that handle all of that. Obviously, the other thing that you can see here is that the types of yarding that you have for pigs is considerably different to the types of yarding that you would have for sheep and cattle. Okay, and that's just because pigs are the way they are. Pigs are really intelligent. They're very curious, and they will try to get through gaps if they see gaps. They're very strong. So we tend to have solid sides if you're moving them around in order for them to just move nicely down the laneways. Where do we go from? Yeah. Oh, the one thing I suppose I didn't say about those farrowing crates, I mean, it's true for any of the facilities in the indoor place, so it doesn't really matter. I can look at other nodes for you. The floors are slatted, a bit like those slatted floors up in the shearing shed. So again, the staff will go and they'll either hose or they'll use kind of like squeezy brooms that will push the feces down and that sort of thing, so we can clean up after the sow. But underneath the floors are big channels that collect the effluent. So piggeries also, obviously indoor piggeries in particular, have to collect effluent, store and dispose of that as well. But the floors in most of these have got slatted floors in the farrowing crates, but then in also all of the other pens, there's slatted floors as well. This is just more farrowing crates. You can see the slatted floors. So these pigs are pregnant. They're getting ready to farrow. These ones here have got an actual sort of automated feed line attached to them. So there'll be a silo at the end of the shed, which will pull the feed along these pipes and deposit it, which means then you can you don't have to go through and scoop one into each individual sow. You can pull a lever and they'll all get fed at once, which is always really nice because they will be screaming at you. This out here is probably a grower shed. Okay, so again, the piglets are kept in small social groups to reduce fighting. In this particular facility, some facilities will have eco shelters where the groups will be larger. Okay, so the eco shelter will have a deep litter floor. It will have a lot of hay put in it as bedding, and a batch of pigs that have been weaned or a batch of pigs that are moving from weaner to grower will be moved into a fresh shed, and they'll be kept there until they're ready to change category. They'll be removed. All of that bedding will be removed and disposed of, and that facility will get sanitized before having fresh bedding put in it for the new batch. These pens as well. So they'll stay here for a set amount of time before moving to the next part of the farm. These pens will all get cleaned before the next batch of pigs is moved into it. And again, you can see the slatted floors here, which is how we can get rid of and collect the effluent on the pig farms. These are just some slightly bigger pigs, so these will be finisher pigs. So I'll give you the notes for that. So piglets are born, they are weaned from their mother, and they're referred to as a weaner. And then they become growers. And then from grower, they'll be termed a finisher. And the reason those terms are used is that the food that you have to feed them during those periods tends to be different because it's matching particular growth requirements at different stages. The same sorts of terms, not weaner, but the same sorts of terms are used for poultry as well. You can refer to poultry as growers and weaners as well. So then the pigs will become finishers, and there's two endpoints for finisher pigs. You're either going to get sold as pork, okay? If you're sold as pork, you're probably about, in New Zealand anyway, you're about 60, 65 kilos, and about 115 to 120 days of age, okay? So it takes about 120 days for a pig to get to about 65 kilos. If you want, or if you're going to hold pigs for a bit longer, you're going to sell them as bacon. So bacon, obviously, you want them a bit bigger, a bit fatter. So baconers are sold at 140, 150 days of age, and they're probably about 85 to 90, sometimes 100 kilos. So there's two kind of endpoints for the meat production part of the pig process. The breeding females, obviously, after they've had their piglets weaned, will go back around into the dry sow shed, and they'll enter another mating cycle. Pigs are not seasonal either. They do experience a slight drop in fertility in summer, but they do cycle all year, and they'll be bred. If I come into here, this here is one of the mating pens. Pigs are interesting in the fact that for a female pig to come into estrus or exhibit heat, she has to have physical contact with the boar. So in order for her to actually exhibit heat and ovulate, she has to be in physical contact with a boar. So pig farms will usually have some entire males on the property, but they're not there for mating per se. They're there to stimulate estrus. The sows themselves, once the staff member has detected that she's on heat, the staff member will artificially inseminate that sow. The contact with the boar normally happens in these sorts of pens. So the sows are held in these little pens because they're getting checked every day for heat. So they'll be brought into the pen, and they might have a boar either on the other side of the pen or in with them. And then the staff members will go around and they'll press the backs of the sows to see whether or not they're on heat. If they run away from the staff member, they're not on heat. If they stand still and put their ears up, then they are on heat, and they can be artificially inseminated. So they'll then stay in the dry sow stall until they either return the estrus, which means they need to come back down and see the boar and be artificially inseminated again, or some places will use ultrasounds. The staff are trained to use ultrasounds, and they can do pregnancy detection via ultrasound. You tend to hold sows in individual pens just after mating, because most embryo losses, as I referred to before, and the same holds true for pigs, most embryo losses occur in that implantation period. So you keep them separated so they don't fight, because there's a wee bit of rejuggling sometimes when they come back down to the mating pen. So by keeping them in individual pens for that first period, whilst conception and implantations occurring, you increase your chance of conception rates, especially with younger pigs with gilts who are being mated. But yeah, so this is sort of for the sows. After that, she'll go into After the pregnancy is established, she'll go into a sow shed where she can sit for the rest of her pregnancy. I just can't remember which node the sow shed was. That's not the sow shed. Dun, dun, dun. Mating pen. This is the sow shed. Okay. So the sow shed, again, sow sheds can look different. This has got slatted floors. You can have sow sheds that have got the hay on the floor instead, but this kind of setup for the feeding is fairly common because it alleviates fighting at the feed trough and allows the sow a bit of peace and quiet while she's eating some food, so that you don't. They're very social animals, pigs, and there's quite a social hierarchy. And you don't want some pigs eating everything and leaving, nothing for the other pigs. So she'll stay here until she's probably about 5 days, before she's going to farrow, and then she'll be moved into the farrowing crates again. So that's the cycle for the sows, and then the cycle for the piglets that are born is from weaner through to finisher. I think that's about it. The other piggery is this one here. Well, this is going to take forever, is it? Maybe. Oh, there it is. So Australia Pork has got some quite nice videos if you want to look at some additional videos on pig farms. They've also got some for the free-range farms as well. What happens in terms of processing, so how pigs are slaughtered and processed, and then some stuff about retail stuff. But their indoor farm is a bit newer than the UQ piggery, but you can follow the Australia Pork farm through some various things. So again, it's probably a bit letter labelled, isn't it? Mating shed. So this is the dry sow shed. So this is where they're held whilst they're waiting to go into the farrowing shed. And then you move into the farrowing shed. So these sheds are a bit bigger, but it's the same setup. They've got farrowing crates. They don't have the sort of boxes that you saw in the other one. They've just got the heat lamps. This is where the piglets are taken when they're weaned. And again, you can see the whole setup is in such a way that they'll stay there for a certain amount of time. They'll be removed. It'll be cleaned, and a new batch comes through. Okay, so that's how piggeries kind of work. Poultry farms are kind of equivalent, but obviously for birds, they function in a bit of a batch system as well. Does anyone have any questions about piggery? How old are bacon pigs? Bacon pigs are about 140 to 150 days of age. We won't, environmental concerns for piggeries. Biosecurity would be, if I had to pick a top one for all of the different places, I'd probably put the slope stabilisation for the sheep farm, the effluent for the dairy, and biosecurity for the piggery. But effluent is a pretty close second for the piggery. But disease containment and disease protection is one of their primary goals. We didn't last time, and I won't bother with a breakout room at this point. If you have any questions for me, ask them now. Otherwise, I'll let you go. Sorry, what were the stock numbers for the UQ piggery? They were 380 sows. But yeah, so just make sure you've got all your notes so that when you come to do the quiz, you've got your notes handy. What were the age of pigs for pork? The age of pigs for pork were about 115 to 120 days of age. So each sow, they may give birth to 12 to 15 piglets, they'll probably wean, so successfully wean. There'll be about 10 piglets per litter that survive to weaning. So about 10 piglets per sow are weaned, and she'll have about 2 litters per year. So every year a sow will probably wean about 20 pigs. Only 2. 10 litters a year is a lot. She's pregnant for, remember, about 3.5 months. Yeah, thank you. Other people are answering other people's questions. Exactly. Pork pigs were 60 to 65 kilos. The bacon pigs were about 85 to 90 kilos. Depends where you get your numbers from. They're the numbers I'm giving you. If you look them up elsewhere, they might differ. How many were reared on site? 2,000 on the UQ site were reared. 2,000 piglets were reared on site annually. Some places may rear all of their piglets. Some places, like the University of Queensland, will only rear a small proportion, and they'll send their other pigs off to finisher sites. If there's no other questions in relation to the piggery, then we can probably sign off, Ella, I think. Yes, they do. Pig and poultry have been bred for, they've been bred to have very high feed conversion efficiency. So they grow really, really quickly, but it's not that you're going to weigh all your pigs, right? At about 115 days of age, you're going to weigh all your finishers. Those that fit into the pork category, you're going to get rid of as pork. Those that are sitting outside it or potentially under it, you're going to hold on to and try to grow through to bacon. So it's not exactly that all of your pigs are 60, 65 kilos, 115, 120 days of age. And that when you keep them then for that extra amount of time, but yeah, pigs put on a lot of weight every day. Can I please repeat the ages for pork and bacon? Yes, so the ages for pork are 115 to 120 days of age, 60, 65 kilos. The ages for bacon, 140 to 150 days of age, and they're 85 to 90 kilos. Chickens are more impressive. They go from that tiny little yellow chick to a 3-kilo bird in about 35 days. But we'll talk about chickens later. All right, no more questions? This will give me a little bit of a break before the tutorial at 12. Did I say there are about 7,500 piglets produced annually? I did say that, yes. So if the 380 sows are producing about 10 piglets per litter twice a year, that's 7,600 piglets, or 7,500 piglets produced annually. Yep. And then, well, I won't now. There's big farms that have got, you know, tens of thousands of sows. So then do that maths and figure out how much pork is produced. Enormous amounts of pork is produced. It's not a very big industry in New Zealand. But a 380 sow piggery is probably pretty small for Australia. All right, I think I'm calling it. I will stop sharing and I will sign out of stuff.